I'm Elizabeth Glassman, for those of you who haven't met, and I want to thank you all for coming. This is the first time that we've used our new offices in this way. We have plans to do this, fall and spring. And we're really pleased that Rachael could help us inaugurate this. But there were also some other reasons why we wanted to gather some interested friends here tonight. And that is that we have two big occasions to celebrate at the Terra Foundation. And one is the release of the first volume of a six volume future six-volume set of essays that the Terra has embarked on publishing. The first one is called Picturing. It's picture theory. And we feel that it's a new approach to a conversation starter on fundamental concepts in art history that then we have invited American art historians to create essays around. International scholars have participated as well as our national colleagues. And our speaker tonight, Rachael DeLue, is the editor of the first volume as well as the series editor, and we're very proud to have her associated with this project. She'll talk a little bit more about their goals for these essays, but they were really designed as a kind of open-ended inquiry using, as I said, an international roster on specific topics that we feel are important in a general sense in the history of art, such as, in this case, picturing theory. Another one that will be published in the fall is on scale, circulation, experience, intermedia, and color. And we feel that this will be a kind of way of starting a bigger conversation and bringing American art into a more complicated dialogue. The project has been led by Francesca Rose in the French office, who's the publications program director and who spearheaded this series. And so she's not here tonight, but we all thank her. And I also really want to thank the very talented graphic designer, James Goggin, who is here tonight. And I'm going to ask him to stand up so you all know. James Goggin is our wonderful designer. And he is integrally thinking not only about the graphic look of the volumes, came up with this wonderful way of coding these volumes, but in our Art Design Chicago initiative, he is investigating historic fonts that were prevalent in Chicago and making a logo for us that reflects that kind of history. So he really is a part of the intellectual properties of the team as well. The second milestone that we're talking about tonight is a purchase of a very important painting by Arthur Dove called Going Through the Inlet. I hope you've had a chance to see it downstairs. We're very excited about having added that to the collection. It's a key work by Dove from 1929, and Rachael will talk at length about this. But not coincidentally, Rachael has just published this wonderful new monograph on Dove. So that was the second reason for us to celebrate her coming here tonight. And I want to introduce P.J. Brownlee. For those of you who don't know him, is the curator of our collection here in Chicago. And P.J. is just back from a very successful opening in Sao Paulo of an exhibition on landscape of the Americas, Terra del Fuego to the Arctic Circle. And so he has been thinking a lot about landscape, and he'll introduce Rachael. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Thank you, Rachael, for making the trip. And I'd also like to thank all the Terra colleagues who helped to make this event happen. So thanks, everybody, for all the work you've done to prepare for this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachael DeLue, who is Associate Professor in the Art and Archaeology Department at Princeton University. She specializes in the history of American art and visual culture, with particular focus on landscape representation, intersections between art and science, and the visual culture of race and race relations in the United States. She's currently at work on a few projects, one of which is a study of Charles Darwin's diagram of evolution on the origin of species, as well as a book about impossible images. Her publications include George Ennis and the Science of Landscape, University of Chicago Press 2004, Landscape Theory, co-edited with James Elkins, and Arthur Dove, Always Connect, which is just coming out as we speak here from the University of Chicago Press in 2016. So please join me in welcoming Rachael DeLue.
Well, first let me thank both Liz and PJ for having me here and the rest of the Terra for inviting me to speak with you tonight. And I'm delighted to be here to speak with you about Dove, but also to share and hopefully give some sense of my appreciation for being part of, or at least my sense of being part of the Terra family for so many years. My first teaching gig was at the University of Chicago, and I spent many a wonderful hour in the galleries at the Terra Museum, and the Terra has given me so many opportunities to engage critically but also creatively with the history of American art through its many programs, publications, and now with this essay series, or the Terra Foundation Essays, as it's officially called, the first volume of which Liz just showed you. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. The series really is meant to pose challenges to the field of American art history, but also raise questions that will resonate more broadly with the field of art history writ large. So as Liz said, to bring what we do in dialogue with what other art historians do, but also, and here's my moment of boosterism, to show folks working in other fields of art history just how much we have to contribute and how creative we already are, and how much they might learn from us. So this is and I have to say, it's really great we have this hanging on view to see, because the JPEG doesn't do it justice. This is Arthur Dove's magnificent boat, Going Through Inlet, from around 1929. And as I was saying to Liz a few moments ago, this is the Dove that I would have purchased. This is a really, really great painting. And I'd only seen it in reproduction before arriving here today. And I instantly, on looking at the thing, in the first moment, instantly peppered PJ with 1,000 questions, because it raised so many fascinating questions for me. So it's about the doviest Dove you can get. And I know a fair amount about Arthur Dove, more than you'd ever want me to tell you, believe me. But let me just say that this is it. This is really, if one can only have one major Dove in the collection, this is really it. I'm just going to show you quickly 4 pictures to evoke the kinds of material that the book Picturing engages. A portrait of Benjamin Franklin by Mason Chamberlain, a photograph taken by Muybridge of Point Reyes in California, a daguerreotype of Frederick Douglass, and a letter that Winslow Homer wrote in the 1890s to a friend to describe his horror of sharpshooting, the technology and practice of sharpshooting during the Civil War. And all of these are pictures that raise questions about meaning, about historical context, but also about pictures themselves. What is a picture? Why do pictures exist? And what about making a picture struck those who made pictures over time in the United States as potentially such a generative act? Because one doesn't have to make a picture, but so many people did. And our question is, well, what drives that act? What drives the act of picture making? And I want to use this wonderful painting in the Terrace collection as a bridge from talking about these questions having to do with picturing, a bridge between that and Dove. So this is John Marin's sailboat Brooklyn Bridge, New York skyline from 1934. So painted very close in time to the Arthur Dove picture. And it perfectly embodies the project of this essay series and perfectly embodies the project of the Picturing book that I just finished editing. on the one hand, this is, as you all know, a really captivating rendition of New York City, the quintessential modern metropolis, right? The dynamism, the vibrancy, the vitality of New York. It's a dazzling jostle of buildings, roadways, waterways, storefronts, and the harbor. It's also improbably a picture that has within it another picture, a painting of some sort of sailboat. Right? And this is not unusual for Marin to play with frames. You'll see that he decorated the actual frame of the picture with splotches of paint. And inside the painting, he's inserted this other painting, this picture within a picture that depicts a multi-masted sailboat. But it's not quite a picture within the picture. And this is where things get fascinating and complex, because you'll see that that sailboat, even though it sits within a frame as if it's a picture floating, again, improbably, on the water, it also somehow comfortably sits on that water. So it's part of both pictures at once, right? It's part of the harbor scene and part of the picture that it seems to be the subject of. And it's triply dissociated or triply unfolded across the canvas, because there's yet another frame, that yellow band of color around the ship. So you have a kind of triple framing effect, which is again absolutely typical of Marin's play with frames. And given this triple framing effect, what happens is that the picture itself is put into kind of playful doubt. And you may think of the wonderful John Peto on view in the same gallery as the Arthur Dove right now, as also a painting that plays with the very idea of being a painting. Is it real? Is it painting? What is it? What exactly is the status of that thing that I'm seeing? And that question, what exactly is the status of that boat inside its 2 or even 3 frames? So this is a painting that's about New York, but about the very act of picturing itself. And that's what I mean when I say that it, in a way, embodies the project of this essay collection on picturing is, and raises a series of questions about what a picture is, what a picture can do, and why a picture might be desirable in the first place. These are the questions Marin raises by way of this wonderful triple framing effect. And I think they're questions that he shared with Arthur Dove. These are questions that Dove considered and worked through experimentally and creatively in his pictures, including this one. And as with Marin's, these questions arise under sail, so to speak. And I want to explain what I mean by this, what I mean when I say this is a picture about a boat on water, but also about the very project of picturing itself, by focusing on the 3 terms from the title of my talk, which are water, wind, and metal. So first, water. And I'm showing you here on the upper left, Dove's sun drawing water from 1933, which lives at the Phillips collection. On the upper right is a painting entitled Storm Clouds from 1935 by Dove at the Met. On the lower left is also a painting called Clouds and Water, and then the Terra's own Fitzhenry Lane, Braces Rock, Braces Cove. Now, water was a persistent and constant subject for Dove. So much of what Dove did as an artist was connected to water. Analogous in a way, and I'm showing you the Fitzhenry Lane for a reason, analogous in a way to the importance of water and the sea to someone like Lane. And I say that water was so much a part of Dove's life because, like Lane, Dove spent much of his life on the water, or near the water, on the shore. And what you see on the left is a photograph, most likely taken by Dove, of his boat, the Mona, which he moored at Haleside on the north shore of Long Island and lived on for a spell. He bought it when he lived in New York City, and he and his partner Helen Torr used it to tour the waterways of New York City, and then they moored it at Haleside and lived shipboard for quite a while. And on the right is a picture of that I like to call Captain Dove. So that's Dove dressed in his captain garb. I'm not exactly sure what he's doing. Looks like he might be crabbing. I don't know. Anyway, so water was a part of Dove's life, but he was also fascinated, and here I'm showing you 3 paintings, and I'll identify them in a minute, he was fascinated by the properties and effects of water, but also waves. And throughout his body of work, and across multiple kinds of subject matter, he uses a waveform motif to render his subjects. And so this waveform motif, and what I mean by that are these concentric circle forms and these striations or bands that seem to progress across the surface of the canvas as if someone has thrown a stone in a pond and the ripples extend outward. This is a motif that you see across his entire body of work. The painting in the center lives at the Art Institute here in Chicago. It's entitled Silver Sun from 1929, so the same year as Boat Going Through Inlet. On the right is Foghorns, also 1929. It lives in Colorado. And on the left is Me and the Moon, which is at the Phillips Collection from 1937. And I should say that Me and the Moon depicts, the title is taken from a song that Dove Heard played on the radio in the 30s. It's a very popular song, and there's a way in which those waveforms that undulate across the surface of that canvas are meant to evoke the Earth's atmosphere, the celestial sphere, but also radio waves moving through time and space. And so this waveform that populates so many of Dove's pictures is a kind of common denominator or connective tissue that designates water, air, clouds, sunlight, moonlight, radio waves, wind. So water was, in a sense, Dove's home, but water was also a form that for him was a kind of fundamental motif or vocabulary. And when you see this waveform unfolding across so many of his paintings, it can conjure a feeling of a kind of super connection across the paintings, but also among water, clouds, moonlight, sunlight, radio, the Earth's atmosphere, the celestial sphere. And you get this sense that what he's doing as an artist is imagining what would happen if waveforms, in a sense, spread across all surfaces and joined everything together as a kind of single whole. I'm showing you 2 more paintings of water to give you a sense of how much he thought about water and waves in his art. On the left is Penetration from 1924, and on the right is River Bottom, Silver, Ochre, Carmine, and Green from 1920. And Dove described these 2 paintings as meant to produce the effect of him looking down while standing in a stream and seeing the water hit his legs and move around him. So the idea of there being a solid object in water that makes it produce a kind of design around that solid object. And you can kind of get a sense of, if you imagine yourselves, and you would never want to do this, but standing on those paintings and looking down, you can imagine what Dove meant the effect to be. So he's also here evoking the feel of water and the shimmer of sunlight across the surface of the water as it moves in time and space and around Dove's own body. And something, I'm telling you all of this because something analogous is happening in this wonderful painting. And I'd like to see, we had a discussion earlier today as to whether or not that was the sun, or maybe it was the moon, and I'm not sure we've made a determination, and I'm not sure Dove would want us to, but there's a way in which you can imagine that circle close to the center of the painting as being dropped into a liquid, and those waves that undulate up and down and across as being the effect of that dropping of a stone or a pebble into liquid. So you get that same effect of a picture that depicts water, but also is meant to evoke the movement of liquid through time and space. And I should note that this painting was made on tin, so it's a metal support. And so I like to imagine, and again, this would never be something one would do with an actual painting, but you can imagine an object hitting the center of that piece of sheet metal and making a sound like a gong, or shaking the thing and having waves of sound reverberate through it. So even the very support, that sheet of metal, evokes this notion of waves, sound waves, light waves moving through a surface or a medium like tin. Now that notion of a whoosh, the sort of whiplash effect of metal reverberating when it's shaken, brings me to my next term, which is wind. And here I'm showing you a work with which you're very familiar. This is the Terra's own beautiful sails from around 1911-12. On the top is Thunder Shower from 1940, and on the bottom right is Golden Storm from 1925. Now wind, technically defined, is a mass of air moving through time and space. So in paintings or in pictures like these, you see the effect of wind. So you see sails blown by the wind, clouds whipped by the wind, water, those sort of sawtooth things at the bottom of Golden Storm. That's meant to evoke the water that's been whipped up by the wind. But you also get a sense of wind as a material thing, right? We can't see the wind, but here Dove renders it visually available as a kind of material presence, as bent sails, as undulating and whipping water, as clouds that move, in a sense, like solid objects across the sky. And Dove used the phrase "wind has weight" quite a lot in his own writing about his art. And he used this term in 1927 in particular to describe the paintings he had on view at Stieglitz's gallery that year. And this comes straight from period weather talk. The wind has weight is a phrase that mariners used during the time to foretell the coming of a storm. So the notion that the wind has weight comes from the world of meteorology, and it also, in a sense, encapsulates what Dove is doing here by making wind materially present. And Dove was an ardent watcher of the weather. He loved meteorology. He owned all the equipment that an amateur would. He had his own aneroid barometer, and don't get me started on barometers because I know a lot about them, and I don't think you're here to hear exactly why an aneroid barometer is not another kind of barometer. But these are two examples of the kind of weather watching and annotating Dove did throughout his life, and they're a little hard to see. But on the left are 2 pages from the diaries he and Helen Torr kept together. And he made regular daily, sometimes several times a day, notations of the weather, barometric pressure, temperature, wind conditions. And in some cases, he used these circle diagrams, and it's not entirely clear what they are. They might be sunrise or sunset diagrams. They might refer to a compass rose. But his diaries and letters and notes are filled as much with weather notating as they are with remarks about his art. And when I first started reading them, I thought, oh, come on, Dove, say something about your art. I don't care that it rained. I don't care that the wind was gusty. And it took me a while to realize, well, wait, this is pretty significant. Dove is a weather guy, and I need to pay attention to this, and his obsessive attention to weather and to how the Earth's atmosphere behaved and into making the weather into a kind of sign made me realize, well, you know what? This is something I can carry over to thinking about his pictures, because weather unfolds across his pictures in the same manner that waves do. On the left is Thunderstorm from 1921, and on the right is a painting with one of the very best Dove titles from his body of work. That's 1942, and it's called Partly Cloudy. And it says it all when it comes to Dove's interest in meteorology. Weather was a constant subject for Dove. It unfolds across his paintings and his collage work in the same manner that weather itself unfolds across geography and across continents. So this is another way in which his art is very much about these broad sweeps and bringing things together and connecting them through a kind of macro view. And I'm showing you here a weather map from the 1920s to give you a sense of how it might have even been the case that Dove adopted these circular lines from the very language of meteorology as a form or a sign to indicate geographic spread and connection. Those are ISO lines, which indicate constant areas of temperature or barometric pressure. And in some cases, when you've got a hurricane brewing, they adopt a concentric circle form in the weather map. And part of me feels like in a painting called Partly Cloudy, how could he not have been looking at a weather map like this and been wanting to evoke the way in which weather is both local but global, right? Because weather, we know, is caused by global conditions amassing in a kind of concentrated form in a particular place. So weather was a subject, but also a connecting medium for Dove. Now, finally, metal, this third term. We've talked about wind, we've talked about water, we've talked about wind/weather, now metal. This is a photograph that PJ sent me, and it shows you quite directly and straightforwardly the metal of this picture, right? So what you're seeing here is a sheet of metal onto which Dove has painted his scene that's been tacked to the wooden support. So this gives you a sense of that materiality, that physical presence of the metal that was Dove's medium. And so, as with canvas in other paintings, metal, in this case tin, was literally the thing that he painted his picture on, right? The thing that received the image he produced. But metal for Dove was also a medium. And I'm showing you here two of his assemblage works that he made in the 1920s, almost all of them while he lived aboard the Mona. So it's interesting to think of him using metal as a medium while living shipboard on the waves. I mean, there are all kinds of things we might say about this. That is Rain on the left from 1924, and this might be my second favorite Dove title. This is Monkey Fur. And this is in the Art Institute's collection. And monkey fur dates to 1926, and that is actual monkey fur. It's one of my favorite wall labels in the Art Institute because it actually says corroded metal, tinfoil, and monkey fur on metal. And so in these two cases, Dove has used metal as the support for his work, but it's also part of the work itself. It's like a sculptural and or pigment medium because the properties of the metal support in each of these works plays an integral role in the overall effect of the scene. And there's a way in which we can see Boat Going Through Inlet as intimately tied then to the assemblage work. The assemblages have always been seen as a sidestep. Oh, he didn't have room to put up an easel on his boat, so he stuck stuff on cardboard and made collages because that's all he had time and space to do. Well, that's just silly. That's not at all the account that emerges if you spend a little time with Dove. But this connective tissue of metal gives you a sense that making Boat Going Through Inlet in the 20s, at the same time he was making pictures like these, means that he's really thinking of metal as itself a medium that unfolds across all of his work. Here are two other examples. Oh, this is another example of metal. This is hand sewing machine at the Met. And what he's done is painted and laid actual linen fabric bits on a piece of tin. And so in some cases, with the little handle, this is a hand crank sewing machine. He's painted it almost like a trick the eye element. And in other cases, he's gone completely abstract with that piece of linen in the middle there. He's also using metal because I think he's fascinated by metal's property of conductivity, right? As incarnated in a work like Telegraph Pole at the Art Institute, in which these flickering leaf-like forms that are actually scraped and carved into that metal sheet on which this is painted evoke the crisp tapping of a telegraph machine, of the telegraphic language that is transmitted over cable by electrical current, as well as the crackling of current that courses across any kind of wire that conducts. On the right is another wonderfully titled work, Rain or Snow, from 1943, and you'll see that it's edged with a kind of silver leaf. It's not on metal, but it's edged with a kind of silver leaf. Telegraph Pole and Rain and Snow were related because, of course, telegraphy was instrumental in period meteorology in the 20s and 30s. This is how people in disparate places communicated conditions in order to put together sets of data that transformed into a forecast. So meteorology in the period was all about connectivity and conduction and telegraphy. And so here you have a sense of telegraphy and weather watching and transmission and current and conductivity sort of bound up and entangled with Dove's own work. And the idea of telegraphy and connectivity joining continents and vast geographies globally. There's also an analog in Dove's music pictures. That's Rhapsody in Blue, Part 1. The title comes from the A side of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. These were 78 RPMs. You can only put so much on one side of a 78 RPM. So Dove made Rhapsody in Blue Part 1 and Part 2. That's Part 1. And it has a metal clock spring stuck to the center of it. It might be a little hard to see from where you are. And on the right is Irving Berlin, Orange Grove in California. These are both from 1927. And Dove made these as he listened to the phonograph recordings on his acoustic phonograph wall on his boat in the 1920s. So with the metal clock spring, and it's hard to see, but he's using silver metallic paint in the Orange Grove picture. So you have Dove on a boat painting while listening to a machine with metal parts, using metal in these pictures. And so you get this sense that these pictures are analogous to the weather pictures and to the telegraphy pictures. And then when you look at works of art like these, that's Electric Peach Orchard at the upper left from 1935. And on the lower right is Dove's exquisite awak poplars in the Terra's collection. That's a pastel on paper, and that's one of the things that made me way back when know I just had to say something about Dove someday. A decade later, here I am. And these are pictures which speak to Dove's interest in conduction and connectivity. Electric Peach Orchard transforms a row of trees into conducting wires. And awak poplars, that may be a tree. It may be a microscopic view of a botanical specimen, but it might also be electrical current coursing through some kind of medium or wire. And on the lower left, I'm showing you a period illustration of something called St. Elmo's fire, which is the electrification and glow of elevated objects like weather vanes, church spires, or ships' masts during a storm. And it was something that people in the period who were interested in meteorology found fascinating. And there's a way in which the electrified peach trees, the current whipped poplar, and those masts of boat going through inlet evoke through metal, through the notion of electricity, through the idea of conductivity, something like St. Elmo's fire, the sort of supercharged glow of an inanimate object made almost by way of preternatural volition. And this brings us back to this picture, which if you take all of what I've said, which might strike you as a bit all over the place, you find it in this thing. And one thing I noticed when I was in the gallery, if you look at this thing from the side and you realize that Dove has left part of that tin plate unpainted, and you see how choreographed and calibrated that is. You see not only a kind of shimmer, the shimmer of light on water, the shimmer of electrical current coursing through and kind of undulating like streamers through the picture, you also see something like St. Elmo's fire, those masts bursting into a kind of preternatural glow. And you think, wow, Dove was amazing. And isn't it terrific that this painting now lives here in Chicago as a kind of exemplar of Dove's use of painting as a meditation on the possibility of a picture to bring everything in the world, water, air, clouds, the Earth's atmosphere, outer space, metal, wind, bodies, properties, phonographs, the radio, all together in a single space to produce a kind of superconducting and super integrating machine of a work of art. So what you've got with this painting is a kind of utopian vision of super connectivity, made, and this is key, made in the period between two world wars, when dystopian visions were equally at issue and urgent in the culture. And he characterized his abstract vocabulary, and this is something we don't often think of Dove as associated with, but he characterized his abstract vocabulary as a social proposition. And I think the social proposition here is this utopian vision of connection and super integration at a moment, the first half of the 20th century, when that proposition was cast into a certain kind of doubt. And when asked, and these are my closing words, when asked what he attempted to do as an artist, he was asked by a journalist, "What do you attempt to do, Mr. Dove, as an artist?" His answer was the impossible. And I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks, guys.